An anonymous saying goes like this: the saddest thing about betrayal is it never comes from our enemies. Keep this in mind throughout the sermon. God was with him. And we're talking about Joseph. Why did God allow Joseph to suffer as he did and not show his love to this great hero? Or seemed like he wasn't. I mean, he had the faith. When I get in my car, and many of you parents probably do this, I don't have a clue what radio station is going to come blaring out of that radio. Between Stephanie and two children, it might be Kids Box or Contemporary Christian, or if I left it on, it'd be traditional. Might be country music. Turn it on the other day, and this country music band I've never heard of, I'm used to regular names, named Ricochet. How many of you know about Ricochet? You know, 2 weeks ago I preached on Tina Turner, so country music has to have a spot. But this man was telling this story about this young girl that noticed him in church. And she's looking at him. And the chorus went like this. She's got her daddy's money, her mama's good looks, more laughs than a comic book, wild imagination and a college education. Add all that up, and it's a deadly combination. Plus, now every man wants this, she's a good bass fisher and a dynamite kisser and more country than a turnip green. Now, she has her daddy's money and mama's good looks and all this other stuff. And it's a cute song, but what caught my attention was this woman had it all. She seemed to have everything, all the advantages in life. Education, good looks, money. There are people in the world that would kind of look at this lady and get jealous. I'm kind of jealous of her myself. They think to themselves, if only I could have her advantages. I could really do something. If I had her good looks, her ability, her education. Several years ago, there was a famous study done, and some of you probably read this study, but it was entitled The Cradles of Eminence. It's where they examine the backgrounds of the 300 most successful people in the world. 300. People like Winston Churchill, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Helen Keller, and the list goes on and on. Gandhi, Einstein. Among those studied of these prominent individuals, they found a surprising discovery. 3/4 of the children in this list, or 3/4 of the people in this list as children, came from poverty or broken homes. They were raised by parents who rejected them. The parents of 3/4 of these people were possessive and over-dominated. And listen, this is kind of strange, but nearly 100% of the writers in this group, whether books or poets or whatever, close to 100% came from a home where they experienced tense psychological drama. In other words, their parents didn't get along and screamed and abused each other. 1/4 of these people suffered from physical handicaps. Of course, we know Helen Keller was blind and Roosevelt was crippled, and the list goes on and on. And it makes you kind of wonder, maybe the circumstances they endured as a child developed them into the person that they became. But this morning, we take a look at Joseph, who overcame similar problems as these people. Joseph came from a highly dysfunctional family. Today we might call it a blended family. You know, we have new words for everything. So we got us a blended family. We got extended families and blended families and all kind of families. The family that Joseph came from, 12 brothers, were born of 4 different mothers. Did you realize that? And the brothers seemed to be fighting among themselves all the time. The only thing that they could agree upon was their hatred for Joseph. That they were unanimous in. So Joseph ends up thrown into a pit, as you know the story, put into slavery, accused of a crime he didn't commit, thrown into prison. Let me say this before we get too far into Joseph. Something you probably have never thought about. Do you know in today's world, we always talk about Joseph's father Jacob making him that coat of many colors and all this. But do you know in today's world that Jacob would have been considered a child abuser? Do you know that? Let me tell you why. Psychologists have found out this, that child abusers find ways to abuse children without laying a hand on them. And one of the ways is pick out a child, put them on a pedestal, the rest of the children will hate them, they'll feel less than, and that child, he don't get off scot-free, he's alienated from all the rest of the children. And it's a technique that's used today, in today's world. So the abuse went around. Nobody got off. So let's just jump to Genesis 39 and we find Joseph already in Egypt. Egypt was already a great nation before Joseph ever got there. Egypt already had pyramids. People would come all over just to see Egypt. It was a tourist attraction way back then. Of course, it wasn't a tourist attraction for Joseph. He was there as a slave. At 17 years old, Joseph had lost everything he loved and considered important. He now lives at the wishes of a master. He is the lowest form of life in Egypt. He has nothing, he owns nothing, he is nothing. Just like all the other slaves, he has no right, no status, no value. But Joseph did have one thing that the other slaves in Egypt didn't have. Joseph had a God who cared for him. Now, ordinarily, most folks go through problems like Joseph without there was even a God that existed. You know, my sister, in a matter that we've been through this past year, she told me Tuesday night, she said, Troy, I prayed, I fasted. I don't know what else to do. In other words, what she's saying is God hadn't answered her prayers. I said, God hadn't answered your prayer the way you think God ought to answer it, and he hadn't answered it when you think he ought to answer it. But do not doubt God hears your prayers, and he will answer them. And so God, in the story of Joseph, wanted to assure us of this. So he put in the story one phrase that shows up again and again and again. And you already know what that phrase is. The Lord was with Joseph. You see it in chapter 39 in verses 2, 3, 5, 21, and 23. The same thing. The Lord was with Joseph. And because God was with Joseph, he was successful in everything he did. Now let me tell you this. This is the part I really like. His success bled over to others. When he was a slave in the house of Potiphar, Potiphar saw what was going on, saw he was being blessed, even in his house and in his fields. So he put Joseph in charge of everything. Joseph in charge of the entire household. Now later on, when he was lied on and thrown in prison, you say, well, that ended. You know, God was with Joseph then, but now he's in prison. Well, listen to this. The Lord showed Joseph kindness even while he was in prison. Can you believe that? The warden put Joseph in charge of the prison. So he was at the top of that. God was still with Joseph in the prison, in the pit, in slavery. And listen to what the Bible says. The warden paid no attention under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Now granted, Joseph was still a slave and just a prisoner, but even at those low positions, Joseph's life had value and purpose. That never went away. Joseph's life in a case study in faithfulness of God's promises, because he has made the same promise to us, I will never leave or forsake you. One of my favorite passages in the Old Testament says this: the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth and strengthen those whose heart are committed to him. 2 Chronicles 16:9. Let me ask you this morning. Are you fully committed to God? Then God's looking for somebody like you. He wants you. He'll strengthen you and make you successful in this world. Psalms 34:15 assures us that the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous and hears our attentive cry. And this is my favorite. This one my dad had, I told you, was a minister for over 60 years and had right beside his desk. So I read it every time I'd go in there. And it says this. Stephanie hadn't heard the sermon, but she probably already knows. Romans 8:28 declares, we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. It doesn't matter what happens in your life, things that are good, things that aren't. If you love God, things will work together in your favor. Then the question comes, but why did God allow Joseph to remain a slave and a prisoner, or become one anyway? Why not just, if you love Joseph so much, take him out and put him in a country where there's maybe fresh drink and he could go fishing, or whatever people did in those days? Listen to this carefully. I once read this. There is something suspect about a faith that has never been tested. Joseph was not ready to lead at 17 years old. Joseph had some growing to do. Many of you have been in the military, and you know as well as I do, an army coming out of basic training is not ready for battle. They've been trained for battle, but until they've been in battle, they really don't know what battle's about. But once they've been battle tested, then they know, and then they are ready for battle. They are proven. Back in the 90s, and many of you remember this, because of the Vietnam War and other things, but researchers examined the effects of post-traumatic stress syndrome. Now this was what military went through in a lot of cases, but also other people go through this situation. Most of you will go through this situation. Most of us. Matter of fact, I don't know anybody hadn't. But one thing that surprised the people in this study, although you had people that had bad nerves for life and overdosed and did all these other things, they found out that a lot of people, instead of having a negative influence, a traumatic situation had a positive influence. Yeah. On the lives of these people. It was significant enough in their study that they branded this new phenomenon post-traumatic growth. Now, you'll be glad you came this morning before I finish here. Is that not what God does when he puts us in these type of situations? He grows us up. You don't grow in a good situation. You don't grow when everything's going fine. You grow when things are traumatic. So I decided that and you wonder, well, who is he? Well, Troy was. I decided to add this word, spiritual. Post-traumatic spiritual growth. How often do you hear someone coming closer to God, or just coming to God, what Neiman say, just coming to God at all, through a traumatic situation? All the time. For many of us, is in the midst of our difficulties, we have wondered if God even cared, but as the fog lifted, and we came to the realization that God was with us, crying with us, sharing our pain throughout our struggles, then we know why we were put there. Let me tell you what happened to me yesterday. I had another story about a colonel that spent a year in a pit that I wanted to tell you, but I'm going to tell you that later, because Sometimes the Holy Spirit just changes what I intend on saying and said, no, that's a great story, and you met this man, and you can share it, but don't share it. Share this story. So I'm going to share this story, and I met these people. This is a little quick story about a lady named Ruby Vaughn and a lady named Ruby Hunter. And I knew both of these ladies well. And both of these ladies were fine, fine people. So were their husbands. Ruby Vaughn's husband passed. And just a few weeks later, I ended up going to see Ruby Vaughn in a mental institution. And visiting with Ruby Vaughn there. And praying for her there. And Ruby Vaughn said that once her husband passed, she had nothing to live for. That was it. And she didn't care if she died. And I talked to her, Ruby, you got children, you got grandchildren, and I tried to put all these things out there that, this is why you should live. And she just sat there. Well, Ruby Hunter and her husband also did everything together. If you saw one getting groceries, the other one was getting groceries. If one was in the fishing boat, both of them was in the fishing boat. If he was in the workshop, she was out at the workshop helping him, or either she was in the house fixing lunch for him. And when Matthew got sick with this lung disease and pretty much death was coming, I think they call it asbestosis, and at that time they couldn't do anything about it, and he was way up in age. People all around the church and the community and the family said this: when Matthew dies, Ruby won't live 2 weeks. They just that much attached. They just that much in love with each other after over 50 years of marriage. Well, Matthew did die. And I was one of the ones that said that. Let me admit that to you this morning. Because I've seen that happen. So I said that. Well, Matthew died, and Miss Hunter mourned. I sat right next to her during the funeral and watched her cry as they did the services in Matthew. And I thought that same thing then. I said, this lady probably going down the same road as Ruby Vaughn. Maybe worse. I don't know. Well, let me tell you this. After a while, I started watching Ruby Hunter, and she was getting more involved in the church. She started going on these seniors trips, visiting people that were sick. 2 of her children were having a real hard time with the death of their father. And who stepped up? Ruby. She said this: listen, children, your daddy and I had a great marriage. We were married over 50 years. And we loved each other greatly. But Daddy's gone. And he wouldn't want y'all acting like this. And he wouldn't want me acting like that. Daddy wants me to continue serving God. And it was then that I realized, while Ruby Vaughn and her husband were more codependent on each other, Ruby and Matthew Hunter were codependent on God. Their life had been centered on God. And God brought her through. And Ruby lived, I think, maybe 15, 20 years after that, and she was going strong till she couldn't go, and they ended up putting Miss Ruby in a nursing home. Well, the point is, people that come through these dramatic situations are the people that God is with them, and they are with God. There was a ladies' Bible study going on once, and they were studying the book of Malachi. And when they read this, and think about this, he was set as a refiner and a purifier of silver. Malachi 3:3. Does that mean anything to anybody here whatsoever? He was set as a refiner and a purifier of silver. And the verse puzzled the entire Bible study. They sat there thinking, well, what is this? So one of the ladies said, you know what? I'm going to find a silversmith and see if he'll let me watch him. And she did. Now, she didn't tell him about the Bible study. She didn't mention a word about it. She just said she was curious about silver. And she watched the silversmith work. And he held a piece of silver over fire in that little thing that they hold. And he let it heat up. And he explained that refining silver, one needed to hold the silver in the middle of the fire where the flames were the hottest as to burn away the impurities. Now listen to this. She asked the silversmith if it was true that he had to sit there in front of the fire the entire time the silver was being refined. And the man answered, the silversmith, yes. Not only did he have to sit there holding the silver, but he had to keep his eyes on the silver the entire time it was on the fire. Because if the silver was left even one moment, one fraction too long, it would be destroyed. No more good. You can pull that one out and start with another. So the woman's silent for a moment. She's thinking. Then she asked the silversmith this question. But how do you know when the silver is fully refined? The silversmith looks back at her and smiled and answered with this. That's easy. When I see my image in it, then I know it's perfect. When I see my image. Now hold that thought. We're almost there. If we haven't already, we will find ourselves in the fire. And most of us is at the age that we found ourselves in the fire already. But just hang on. Our human instincts may prompt us to doubt God while we're in that fire. Mine does. But if we'll just stay long enough till the great silversmith sees his image in us, instead of post-traumatic stress, we will experience post-traumatic spiritual growth. But of course, we have to do this first by choosing God to begin with, by asking for his graces, his mercy, and his forgiveness to begin with. But once we do that, anytime we put into the fire, the instant that God sees his image in us, we will come off that fire. The cell door will open, morning will come, the sun will rise, and the reflection of him off of us will shed a light to a world of much grief and pain. Stand while we pray, please.